How are you tonight?
Very well. And you, David?
Very good, very good. For the audience tuning in, this is an episode of Libertarian Currents where we hear. I get together with Jacques, the leader of the Libertarian Party of Canada, and we discuss some of the current events. And like and share and subscribe, and please consider joining the Libertarian Party. Become a member. There's a link over there in the corner, and I think it's $10 a year, and you can be a voting member of the party, and get involved. Jacques, I think the first topic today is about the problems we have in Canada regarding free speech, free expression, licensure, and certain licensing bodies that seem to be weaponizing their policies against people. Do you want to introduce it, and then we'll watch a brief video?
Well, as people probably know, Jordan Peterson has been called to task by the College of Psychologists of Ontario, asking that he attend some remediation because they didn't like some of his posts, most of which had absolutely nothing to do with the practice of psychology. And he's had some legal wranglings and trying to fight back, and not quite sure the legal term, but I think he had an application to the Supreme Court, having lost previous ruling, and they refused to hear it. And so now he's announced that he's going to follow up and be retrained, or whatever the topic is. So we can listen to the clip where he talks about this, and then I have some comments to make about how dangerous the state of affairs there is in Canada.
Can I just, before we watch the video, I think remind people of the so-called offenses. As I read the history of this case, and admit I'm not an expert on it, but I think there were basically two tweets that got Jordan Peterson into significant trouble. Maybe they were the straw that broke the camel's back, but one of them was a criticism of the Sports Illustrated cover page, on which the magazine featured a clearly obese woman as a model of health and beauty. And Jordan Peterson expressed an opinion to say that I don't think that's beautiful or healthy. The other was related to a former actress, current actor, and Jordan Peterson is perhaps allegedly guilty of misgendering this person. And for those of you following the trajectory of our laws in Canada, this is now illegal according to Bill C-16. It's illegal to misgender someone. And those are the two posts, I think, that he made that eventually caused the association to take action. And of course, leading up to that, they might have been ready to take action and ready to pounce.
Let me add one more, because that's the one that I think they said was more about the practice of psychology, but somebody was going on about the fact that there are too many people on the planet, and Peterson says something like, well, you're welcome to exit at any time, or something to that effect, which the college is now saying, or members of the college are saying, this was an encouragement to suicide, which, as a psychologist, it's terrible. Of course, missing the point entirely. I mean, as if, right? But yeah, I think that was the third one.
There may be a fourth where he posted, and more than one post, very, very critical of the what's called gender affirming care. And he's been very critical of his fellow psychologists. Well, actually, that's since the association took action. So I think, the association took some action against him, and that has emboldened him to some extent. So now he's been very outspoken about his colleagues in the practice who are very quick to rush children toward hormones and puberty blockers, and even in some cases surgeries. So there's some background, I guess. Are we ready to watch the video?
Yep.
Don't need to spend 30 hours talking to someone about how I should reform everything I know from first fundamentals. But I'm going to go through with it. Why? I'm a citizen of Canada, subject to its laws, such as they are. And so I'll play the bloody charade out till the end. Now, what should Canadians think about this? There's a hard question, because you're between a rock and a hard place now. You can either assume that I'm the right-wing scoundrel, unable to control my tongue, that the left-wing radicals who don't like me would like you to presume, and perhaps they're right. Or you can assume that the Canadian judicial system and the regulatory system and the legislative system to some degree, as well as the education system and the healthcare system, has become so bloody corrupt that it can't be trusted in its dealings with you as individuals or in its dealings with professionals such as myself. And I suppose if I was the typical Canadian, it would be a lot easier to presume that I'm the unruly, far-right scoundrel that the leftists insist upon than to make the terrible judgment that the jig is up, boys and girls, and the Supreme Court of Canada itself can no longer be trusted to bear the responsibility to make the decisions that are appropriate to its domain.
Well, that's the clip. Go ahead, Jacques. What are your thoughts?
Unfortunately, his battle to me amount to people trying to shut him down because he holds views that they don't like. It's pervasive now, this attitude that it's funny. There was another clip where he was being interviewed by a woman, and she was pushing back and said, "But what about the right of this person not to be offended by your comment?" Now, this is a premise, this idea that we can go through life without being offended, that is very commonplace. I don't know where it comes from, but it is absolutely incorrect. The very idea that we're supposed to have a human right not to be offended makes no sense whatsoever. I mean, life would be unworkable, society would be unworkable. I mean, as a libertarian, I'm offended by most of what Justin Trudeau says. What if I wanted him to to be canceled or shut down or whatever because he offends me? I mean, you could weaponize this against any, and it doesn't matter what party you're for or what your views are or right. I mean, but the left in many ways have decided that they can do that, but the rest of us cannot. Right? Whether it's Peterson or me, if I express a view that they don't like, they think it's perfectly fine to take me to court or to act through my professional association. I mean, that's another element in all this that is very, very dangerous, is that people within professional bodies that are supposed to regulate you, again, will use this to weaponize it if you say things that have absolutely nothing to do with the profession that you exercise, although they will try to justify by saying, well, it puts the profession in a bad light or whatever. I mean, it's just nonsense, because again, if I express a view, as I am today, on political matters, my professional body could say, well, we don't like what you're saying and it reflects poorly on the profession. Nonsense, right? I'm not practicing as an actuary at the moment. I am practicing as I suppose, a politician. So, I have a great deal of sympathy for him, because I think he's being treated very, very unfairly based on premises that are simply wrong.
Professional organizations can be emboldened by the current policies and laws of Canada. Bill C-16, which now adjusts the criminal code so that it's illegal to misgender somebody, and you can face 5 years in prison for that. But also the censorship laws that have been passed in the recent sessions in Parliament, that give a lot of power to the CRTC to regulate regular people. So not even professional organizations that can wield some of their authority, but now every Canadian is regulated by the CRTC in terms of what they can say online and see online. And the latest laws criminalize thoughts or words that you haven't even expressed yet. Lots of articles. I think we spoke a few episodes ago about the pre-crime laws that are now in place in Canada, that you can be sentenced to house arrest for saying for on the suspicion that you might say something that harms another person. And so all that does is, like, to your point, it weaponizes laws and puts a lot of power into the hands of the people most easily offended.
Absolutely. And, because some of that can come through via Human Rights Commission, this can be done anonymously. I mean, to get back to his case with the college, apparently the complaints came from people who have never dealt with him, and they came from the US. Yeah.
We used to call that extrajudicial or something like that. Like, it was like a way of subverting, like, these. Well, and you brought up the Human Rights Commission. I mean, we just learned about one of the employees of the Human Rights Commission in Canada. It has resigned because of a history of saying terrible things and getting caught for it. So they certainly aren't an organization that has some sort of monopoly on morality, right? Like, you have some sort of unique guide or compass to show the rest of us a proper morality, and neither does the Association of Psychologists. What do you think about Jordan Peterson's comment around like the institutions in Canada? Like, he kind of points out something interesting to me, which is it's easier for people to think that he's the villain rather than understand that most Canadian institutions are deeply corrupt, right? The judicial system, he talks about the regulatory, legislative, education, and healthcare. Like, most Canadians will think, well, certainly, no, they're all doing fine, and they can't all be so corrupt that. So, what do you think of that?
Well, it's difficult to disagree with them that most of these institutions are indeed corrupt. I mean, and here, what I mean is, I think that what we have ongoing is abuse of power. People of a certain mentality take over institutions, and then they use the power of the institution again to, whether it's cancel people or hound people or things of that effect, because again, they immediately cloak themselves into righteousness, right? Like, my position is pure, my position is right, and anyone who disagrees with me has to be, terrible. And therefore, I have the right to hound them, to make their lives miserable. It's pretty shocking to me, the degree of certainty that people have about their own belief system. But, I once read, someone said, when doubt disappears, zealotry enters. And I think a lot of that is happening right now, regarding a lot of the more commonplace issues, whether it's about gender or whatever. I mean, people are so absolutely convinced that they are right. It gives them carte blanche to go after anyone who often will. It's not even a question of necessarily disagreeing. It can be simply asking some question to try to get to the truth, and just questioning is now deemed to be unacceptable, right? You have to accept blindly what you're being told, and this is a recipe for disaster.
Just in the past week, we've seen in the United Kingdom, somebody tweeted or X'd, what's it called on X now when you post? I guess it's called a post. Somebody posted that disinformation is now illegal in the United Kingdom, posting disinformation. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Actually, posting information is illegal in the United Kingdom now. Like, it's not disinformation, but to for example, repost a video of like an ongoing street brawl or riot, like just to repost the fact that this is happening on that street right now, to repost that is illegal in the United Kingdom.
But David, in our own country, we have a judge, I forget his name and I forget exactly when it happened, but he actually stated that stating the truth can be hate speech.
Right. Saying something truthful
can be
in
hate
fact
speech.
be considered hateful speech in Canada, harmful speech. So it's about harmful speech. And again, there's a great comment actually by someone, hello to the audience watching. Someone said that offense is taken, not given. Like, I wish more people lived by that creed.
Sorry, to live by what creed?
Well, the notion that offense is taken, not given. So if someone is offended, it's their own doing that they've become offended. They've become maybe intolerant of another's opinion, or they've become unable to deal with the cognitive dissonance of what they currently believe and what someone else currently believes, or they've become uncomfortable with information that might disconfirm their current position, and because of that discomfort, they just never want to feel that discomfort, and so they want to outlaw it. They want to outlaw whatever it was that made them feel uncomfortable. It seems to me we have laws like that now on the Canadian books. That
very, very much so. I mean, Christopher Hitchens, who offended a lot of people, used to say, when someone comes to me and says, "You offended me," my reply is, "I'm still waiting for your counter argument."
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Right? Like
he's willing to have that debate. He's willing to have argument.
Yes. But I find that the level, frankly, of laziness out there in terms of people. I mean, it is so easy to cancel somebody or shut them down instead of engaging in the conversation. But I personally believe that most people are absolutely unable to defend with facts and logic their position, right? They just have this emotional response to something, they claim it to be the truth, and then they will cancel you.
We have some good comments. Thank you for those of you watching and getting involved in the conversation. Is there anything else you want to talk about with regard to the Jordan Peterson circumstance, or do you want to move on? We have another topic here.
Well, I would simply say that, and I see here that a lot of people don't like him. Fine, but the problem is way beyond Peterson. The problem is now a framework that enables people in power within professional or trade association to come after you if you express views that they don't like, and that we have to fight back. It's profoundly anti-freedom, and we cannot let that go.
I agree. If that proceeds unchecked, like I can think of half a dozen people on the top of my head who belong to professional organizations, and that I know personally, who could be stripped of their license. I'm a professional. I work with a professional organization. I'm licensed by them to deliver their intellectual property in the form of corporate training. And if I were to take a position politically that they don't like, could they strip my license? I think about this every day, and I do worry about it, especially when someone as now successful and infamous and wealthy as Jordan Peterson can get into trouble. I wonder, well, what about little old me? I could certainly be in trouble.
Well, one last comment on this. So you touch upon, the status and money and all that. One of the worst forms of censorship is self-censorship, where people would love to be able to express an opinion, but they have become so fearful for their livelihood that they just shut up. And again, this is a recipe for disaster. So we have to fight back.
I agree. So let's move on. The next topic here, we're talking about the Fraser Institute report that recently came out. And now I'll admit, I've not read this report. So I would, I guess, love just a summary from you and what is it that you think important about this report? I saw some highlights, so I know where this conversation is going, but yeah. What do you think, Jacques?
Well, I don't think that we need to go into a great deal of details because I think the high level speaks for itself. So let me just quote 4 numbers. Well, I'm going to date some dates as well, so that's 6 numbers. But in 2023, the average Canadian family spent 43% of its income on taxes, compared to 36% for basic necessities. And the basic necessities are housing, food, and clothing. Now contrast that to 1961, where they only spent 33% on taxes compared to 43% now, but they were spending 56% on the basic necessities. So basic necessities went from 56% in 1961 down to 35 or 36% now, while taxes went up from 33 to 43%. Okay? Now, again, people better wake up here, because what we have is basically the free market, to the extent that it's allowed to operate, has driven the cost down of the things that people need every day. Meanwhile, the government has taken a bigger share of what people essentially produce. So while the free market has become more efficient, producing more for less, the government has done completely the opposite. What we should see here, because the other thing to remember, and this is very, very important, the average Canadian household is far efficient, far more productive today than it was in 1961, because they have tools now that didn't exist back then that made them more productive. So the average household is far more productive, and yet a greater percentage of this greater productivity is being taken by the government. It's not surprising that the basic necessities have come down as a percentage, because a productive society ought to be driving prices down. Ignore all this Keynesian nonsense that, inflation goes up because, the economy is booming. It's complete nonsense. A productive society drives prices down. And we've seen this if you go back to from the period of about 1770 to 1910, so a period of 140 years, prices were coming down gradually, right? About 1% a year on average. So we have lived through periods where a more productive society was driving prices down. That's the way it ought to happen. But suddenly, in this country anyway, the government is so inefficient, and now, certainly under the Liberals, I cannot think of a facet of my life where the Liberals don't think that they have a role to play. So, of course, they're expanding all the time. I mean, we were talking about Bill C-16. I mean, what's the number that they plan on hiring 200 or 400 people, something like that, to monitor the internet and to hunt down people who say things. And I mean, what a waste.
C-16 from 2016. That's C-18 maybe this past year. But yeah, point taken. It's just I don't.
Right, like we're going to hire battalions or several battalions of people to hunt down the people on the internet. I mean, what a counterproductive, right? How about you don't hire these people? You lower people's taxes so they can do with them as they wish. I mean, when you see these numbers, what should happen is in a richer society where your basic necessities are representing a smaller and smaller percentage of your income, what you should see go up are things that you couldn't afford before because you had no money left, right? Travel, vacations and things of that nature, because
Home
suddenly,
improvements.
yeah,
Like,
right.
for example, I would love to do some
Do some
landscaping in my
landscaping.
backyard, and I predict, and I got a quote that it could be $10,000 to $12,000, which seems expensive, but when you take into account materials costs and some labor, it's probably 3 or 4 days of labor plus whatever. My point is, I'm faced with a decision. Do I employ this local person that could perform this work that I would like to have done, or not employ that person? And my choice right now is to not employ them, because my family is facing this burden from our, I'm paying people in Ottawa to conduct their bureaucracy rather than paying local tradespeople to do home improvement or other discretionary spending. So I like that you bring up this point that, and notice that the average income, I'm just looking at the page on screen right now, that the average Canadian family earned an income of $99,000. That's average in our country, which years ago, that would seem like a lot of money, but given inflation, given the fact that most households have 2 earners, right? So this is 2 people earning money, bringing that money into the household, and then having to spend 43% of it on taxes. It's completely absurd and out of hand. And like, people must feel this. They feel that tax burden. What do you think is the likelihood that people will make different voting decisions, that given the fact that they feel this burden?
Well, these types of numbers have to be publicized as much as possible so that people, there's probably a lot of people listening today who weren't born in 1961, right? So it's very difficult for them to compare. And in fact, I was 1 year old, so I'm in no position to compare. So you would have to be like my mother's age, for example, to measure how bad things have gotten from a tax point of view. I mean, one of the things that we have to face all the time is people being born in a system thinking that that's the way it's always been. See, this is where education comes in, where we have to remind people that once upon a time, the government was just so small compared to what it is today. But people are born into a system where the government is immense, and they think that that's the way it has to be. It does not, right? And we have to convince them. But I'm not answering your question directly. I think that people, rightly or wrongly, when things go badly, and they're not good right now, will take it out on the incumbent. So people will try to grasp at a party that they think is going to, right? I mean, it looks right now like Canadians are receptive to any party that would say, you know what, we're going to lower your taxes. I think that would resonate. And that's why you should vote Libertarian, because we're the ones who are going to provide the biggest tax cut of all. But anyway.
Does this report from the Fraser Institute discuss the effect across Canadian income earners with respect to tax? Like, we have a progressive tax system, okay? So for households that earn $99,000, they're paying 43% of their earnings as tax. But what about those who earn less? Like, at what point does the proportion change in favor of the earner? Presumably, if I earn much less than $99,000 in my household, my portion of tax will be less because of the progressive tax system. Does this report go into that detail at all? And the reason I'm asking is because what I worry about is that, like, there's a demographic perhaps who, let's say, earn less than a particular threshold, and they are led to believe truly that the NDP policies and the current liberal high tax policies aren't punishing them; they're punishing the rich. And I don't think that's the case. I think taxes punish people all across the board, and wealth redistribution isn't really a reward for anyone. That's my thinking. But does the Fraser Institute go into that at all?
Well, I haven't read the entire report, so I don't know. But let me comment, because there are elements that are very punitive to low-income people, and there are other ones that are more punitive to high-income people. So when it comes to income taxes, clearly, for all the claim that rich people don't pay their fair share, that's nonsense. You just have to look at the percentage of the total taxes that are paid by, say, the top 20% or the top 10%. It's disproportionate. Like, it's way more than the actual income that they get. So from that point of view, if you like a progressive tax system, it's doing its job, because the more you earn, the more you pay. Now, this 43% in terms of taxes, that's all in. It's not just income tax. Right. It's GST. It's land transfer tax if you buy a house. It's excise tax at the pump, right? And many of them are not progressive at all, right?
Many of them are hidden, which is why people don't realize the burden.
Right, and hidden, right? And those, I would argue, hit low-income people disproportionately high. And let's not forget here about inflation. Inflation is a hidden tax. And once again, if you're well-to-do, you will manage in spite of high inflation. In fact, inflation might just increase the value of your assets. But if you don't have assets and you're low income, inflation will eat you up. And which is why inflation, again, should be I'm on the verge of losing it here because it upsets me so much. But the very idea that we are supposed to have inflation, right? I mean, the Bank of Canada mandate is to aim for 2% inflation. Who in his right mind believes that we have a system that has to be built on prices going up every year? I mentioned earlier the period of
devaluing the currency every year.
Right. Yeah. But I mentioned earlier, right, the period of 1770 to 1910, prices were coming down, and we have never experienced rate of growth that we experienced back then. Right. So this idea that we need to have prices to come up in order to, for some reason, grease the wheels of the economy. I can't stand all these analogies about cars. I mean, as if the economy is a car. But I mean, that's what it amounts to. Again, I don't know. Well, actually, I do know where the 2% comes from. And it has nothing to do with economic theory. I mean, the mandate of the Bank of Canada should be zero inflation, or possibly slight deflation like we used to do to reflect the fact that we have a more productive economy.
There's a great comment. Actually, there's a few comments coming in. And I wonder if our producer could show that most recent comment regarding the 2%. There you have it. Someone shares your frustration, Jacques.
Yes.
Well, many of us do, yeah. And I'm told that there are some other comments, so let's bring them up on screen and get caught up with what's going on. And by the way, thanks for all of you watching and commenting and getting involved in the conversation. I don't agree with this statement on screen currently. I think that there are a few levers in our economy, and one of them is taxation, and the other one is productivity. And I know that they're related, but like, if we could lower tax, which is likely to increase GDP because people will activate their capital rather than hold on to it. And then that helps to address the debt challenge that we have. Also, if we keep taxation high and therefore spending high, we make more debt in this country. So I appreciate the comment. I just think that it doesn't stand up to my logic. Anyways, Jacques, what do you think? Am I misinterpreting this comment or not?
No, I mean, I'm not without. Okay, I mean, I could go on for a bit here, but because my thoughts on this are, I would say, nuanced, right? I understand where he's coming from, because if you want to have some credibility, say, as a nation, then you ought to honor your debt. And even from an honor point of view, you would say, well, we people who bought our bonds did this, with an expectation they were going to get paid. We should also keep in mind that many of the bonds that have been purchased purchased by pension plans, by things of that nature, so that there is a benefit to people. Having said that, I think sometimes, because, okay, now let me just step back. This inflation, in part, is done because inflation is always benefiting the borrower, right? Because the borrower can pay back in money that's been debased. So there's an incentive there to keep inflation going up. But I would prefer, if we're going to default, because to me that's a form of default, if we're going to default, I would prefer to do this more honorably, which is more straightforward. And if we have to go back to our creditors and say, the situation is such that we can only pay you 80 cents on the dollar, I think it ought to be explored. I'm not stating that that's what we should do necessarily, but it can certainly be something to explore. Actually, someone said 25% of the government Canada bonds are owned by the Bank Canada. Easy default there. Why 25% of debt? Well, if if that's true, I would probably go along with that.
I can't wrap my head quite around that comment right now. I presume the detail is right, is accurate. Those bonds, though, if they were to default, would that, like?
See, the risk of default here is that, and quite frankly, as a libertarian, I have no problem with that, other than the, doing the right thing part. But the problem they always mention is that if you default on your debt, and of course they never include defaulting through inflation, which to me, ought to be part of the discussion. But the fear is that, oh my goodness, if you default on your debt, good luck trying to go back to the market, to borrow in the future, because nobody's going to lend you. To which I say, wow, you're saying that we would have a system that would compel the government to live within its means? Well, that doesn't seem like a bad thing to me.
To my knowledge, Argentina, have they defaulted on any debt? And
governments in South America, and it's not the only place, but have defaulted repeatedly. They go
Argentina
to the
in particular, like that economy is turning itself around rapidly.
Yeah,
and it's mostly because he's just cutting spending.
Yeah,
and reining in the spending of the government. So there's a link that I'll have to look at later. Thanks, by the way, for the commenter who's bringing information about the Bank of Canada bonds. I'll look into that later. What's more to say on this topic, Jacques? The Fraser Institute has done some pretty good work here. I know that a lot of people like to dismiss their work because they are so-called right-wing. I don't think of them as right-wing so much as I think of them as keen economists.
But David, again, this type of attitude where you dismiss someone's viewpoint, if you have a problem with the analysis, why don't you criticize the analysis as opposed to simply, I won't even bother looking at this because you're a right-winger and therefore you must be doing things wrong. That's nonsense. How can we possibly get to the truth, right, with that type of attitude? Criticize the analysis if you think there's a fault in it, but if you're unable to criticize the analysis, then maybe they're onto something.
I think you mistakenly presume that most people are pursuing truth, and I don't think that's the case in particularly. I think that there's many politicians that are pursuing power, not truth, and that's one way to get through to it. I see another good comment is coming our way, and a good segue to the next topic. So let's see that. Let's talk about the jobs report, Jacques. How's that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
terrible, terrible jobs report. So
And
the
what's
highlight,
terrible about it?
yeah, the highlight is a change, positive change of about 41,000 in the public sector, while losing 42,000 jobs in the private sector. Now, let me start by saying that the average talking head, the average journalist who covers these things, again, I think there's just sheer laziness on their part because they don't go beyond the headline, right? Because in this case, the headline would be, oh, unemployment is mostly unchanged. That's not good enough. You do have to go below. And when you see massive loss in the private sector, more or less offset by public sector, then you know that the problem is even deeper than lack of growth in employment. Because what we've done here is we've lost the productive jobs, and we've added jobs that are either unproductive or where you have no way of measuring whether they're productive. Simply because if you are a government, like a public sector employee, there's no economic signals to tell you whether you're doing the right thing or not. There's no profit and loss. There's no volunteer request for services because the government grants itself monopolies. I mean, there's all kinds of problems, right? I mean, I was mentioning earlier these I forget if 230 or 400 employees who are going to hound the internet and all that. I mean, those are public sector employees. Are they going to provide any good whatsoever to society? The answer is no. But
well, I agree they're not going to provide any good. But are they public sector employees? Like, I wonder in this report here on screen, how many jobs are, like, if your T4 income flows from the wallets of taxpayers, well, then you're working for a government, okay? But that doesn't mean that they're captured in this number, Jacques. So those 400 employees are going to work for CRTC, probably, not as public sector employees. The CRTC, are they considered public sector employees, or are they arm's length? Who else is not captured by this number? Consultants who work for government. They're considered private sector, but their employment, their income is entirely generated from the taxpayer. I think there's a lot of people across this country who are paid by the taxpayer, and they're not included in this percentage on screen. That worries me because I think that number is even higher.
It never occurred to me that a CRTC employee would not be considered to be a public sector employee. Maybe you're right, in which case the whole thing's even more rotten than I thought it was. Yeah, like even if we take it at face value, we have a problem because these public sector employees, as you rightly point out, are paid by the people in the private sector. So if we lose them, it means that the burden on the ones that remain is going to be even worse. This is a terrible, terrible jobs report, and it never got the publicity it should have because people couldn't see beyond the negative one.
What it means to me is that there are fewer people whose income is generated from the production of goods and services paying for more and more people whose income flows directly from the wallets of taxpayers.
One of the things that's driving this, because a lot of people would say, well, you're excited about nothing because a job's a job's a job. But too many people are too mesmerized by, again, jobs. Like we don't, the thing to understand is we don't want jobs. Like jobs are not an end. The end is the production that arises out of a job, right? So we ought to emphasize production, not the number of jobs. I mean, I've often said that, do you think that we would be better off or worse off if we had to manufacture oxygen, right? Because oxygen is free, right? Like, we need oxygen in order to live, but it's free. We don't have to produce it. But what if tomorrow morning we needed to produce oxygen, right? And possibly, some people would say, well, gee whiz, you'd be creating a lot of jobs. But we don't have finite. No, but the key here is that we don't have infinite resources. We have finite resources. So if we had to allocate people to the production of oxygen, right, those people would no longer be available to produce something else that we need, right? So clearly, we would be worse off, right? Or similarly, I could wipe out. I could eliminate unemployment tomorrow morning. Why? I could pass a law that would forbid any mechanization whatsoever on farmland, right? It would all have to be done with pick and shovel. In fact, I could make it even worse. You wouldn't be able to use anything bigger than a spoon, right? So, problem solved. Would we be better off? Everybody would have a job. Would we be better off? Absolutely not. We would be poor. We'd be enormously poor. So people have got to stop thinking about this job thing as a mantra. What we have to look at is the production. Are we producing more or less than before?
Good points and some good comments coming in as a result of your comments. Production is good. I wonder if it's an intentional strategy of our current government because they know that our GDP is suffering, our productivity as a nation is suffering, and people are losing jobs. Unemployment is increasing. And is it a deliberate strategy to hire as many people into the public sector as are losing in the private sector so that the jobs report somehow evens out? Like, Justin Trudeau can say that there were no fewer jobs this month than last month.
I wouldn't put it past them at all. I mean, I
don't know what else these people are doing in our. How is it possible that our government needs so many people? They're all they're doing is producing bureaucracy. I don't know what they're producing. What that's a good question. Can you name a job in our current government, any department that actually is involved in the production of goods or services? Well, I guess we have like nationalized. We have a nationalized pipeline. Are those public sector employees? Or is that contracted out to someone who manages the pipeline and employs their own private sector employees to do so?
Good question. I don't know if it's a crown corporation or, yeah.
What other crown corporations are? So public sector, so that report we saw would include provincial and federal public sector employees?
Yeah.
Okay, so I can revise my question. So I grew up in Saskatchewan. There are crown corporations there. And so, yeah, there are people there who are providing phone services through SaskTel or energy through Sask Energy, electricity and natural gas through those companies. And they are actively engaged in the production of goods and or services. So kudos to them. Great.
Well, I mean, let me give you an example, but it's a terrible example because it's in such disarray right now. But the entire judicial system, right, is providing a service that more or less, well, it's two main things. One is to enforce contracts, which, if you want to have a society that works well, it's very, very important, right? I mean, you need to have either explicit trust in somebody else, or at least implicit in knowing that you're going to go to jail if you break a contract. And of course, there's the element of criminality, trying to prevent theft and murder and things of that, of that nature. But I did a presentation too long ago where I pointed out what a mess the entire judicial system is. I mean, it can take years to go to court, and so this is something that, yeah, it's a service it provides, but it provides a lousy, lousy service. In fact, the service is so lousy that they would never allow a private sector to operate in that, because they would come in and pass judgment and lecture them, right? The way they like to lecture airline executives or grocery store executives or whatever, right? I mean, other people never act properly, but boy, the government runs a splendid judicial system. Or you used to be in Saskatchewan. Have you ever seen the stats on how long it takes for the RCMP to get to a remote farm in the prairies?
I've
45
not seen
minutes.
the stats.
It's 45 minutes is the average time. 45 minutes. I mean, like if someone comes with ill intent at your farm, 45 minutes. I mean, they're going to do whatever they want to do, unless, of course, you attempt to defend yourself. And then if you do, you're likely to go to jail because, hey, in Canada, we're not allowed to defend ourselves.
Yeah, there's a huge gray area there, and it's certainly not clear. It seems that just on the issue of self-defense, upon trespass, I've learned of cases that go either way. It seems like it's just up to the judge of the day. There isn't a clear cut.
Yeah. So does that sound like a good judicial system to you?
Well, you brought it up earlier. I don't know if we were online, on the air at the time, but you were talking about the problem we have with the asymmetry in this country of how law is applied and enforced.
Yeah.
And so we can have a law in the criminal code that some judges will be quite strict and others won't be. You can commit one person can commit a certain kind of crime and not be prosecuted for it. Another person could commit the same kind of crime and go to jail for two months and a trial for 3 years. Like Tamara Leach is currently in trial still for the charge of mischief, apparently. I saw a headline from somebody that said this is the longest running mischief trial in Commonwealth history.
Yeah, it's an absolute disgrace. I mean, it's a disgrace, at least in relation to the treatment of other people. I mean, there was a gang, 18 people got busted in the Peel region of Toronto the other day for home invasion, car theft, and something else. The next day, 12 of the 18 were out on bail.
Yeah.
Right? And
Tamara
she's still
Leach
fighting?
spent 2 months in jail before any bail conditions were set and no trial had taken place, no charge. I don't even know. Had a hearing taken place yet for her charge? I don't even know. But it was totally asymmetrical here.
Yeah. It's pure vindictiveness. Yeah. Right? She dared challenge the government, and it's okay to steal people's car. It's okay to invade people in their homes, but don't you dare criticize the government.
No,
I've said it many, many times. This libertarian government, liberal government, is authoritarian. Is an authoritarian one. Trudeau acts like a dictator to the extent that he tries to get away with it. It's a complete disgrace.
I see a comment here from someone saying that we're soft on crime with weak borders and it's not a safe country now. But I want to bring back, so I want to your point, Jacques. People need to understand, why does this current Liberal government permit certain kinds of crime while stamping down and pouncing on other kinds of crime? And I believe it has to do with property rights and individuality. So those home invasions and car thefts and that gang of 18 people in Peel are given lenient treatment by the law because their actions erode property rights and individual rights. Tamara Leach is 3 years of lawfare, 2 months in prison, and the full force of the law because her actions, her personal philosophy is one against socialism. And this is the fundamental definition of socialism. And I think you'd agree, socialism socialism aims to abolish private property. The abolishment of private property, make all property the I guess, the property of the state.
That's a very interesting take. I never thought of it that way, but you might be onto something.
And so why is a home invasion allowed and not penalized? Because it erodes private property rights. Why do we have open borders? Well, because what right do you have, Jacques, to have a safe country? Right.
Although I will point out the hypocrisy, because I pretty much guarantee that Justin Trudeau's house is guarded all the time, because suddenly his private property right have to be maintained.
Yeah, I don't even know if that's because he believes the property right so much as the status needs to be maintained. Right? The status of that office and the fact that he holds that office needs to be maintained. It's an interesting problem. We don't have any more topics, by the way. Maybe our producer has noticed some interesting comments that we should refer or discuss, but otherwise, what else do you want to talk about, Jacques?
Well, I just a small segue here. That there's a comment about there was a home invasion attack in family in Southern Ontario recently, which really highlighted how unsafe we are today. It's very sad. Now, the segue here is just today I posted there was a tragedy in the town of Essex in Ontario, where a mother and her two children were killed by, I guess, an ex-partner who then committed suicide. And the outcome of this is that the Council of Essex has written a formal letter to the province of Ontario asking to expedite the passing of Bill 116. And Bill 116 is one that basically state that partner violence in Ontario is an epidemic. It's an epidemic. Now, these things drive me crazy because there's no practical element to this at all. Like, to me, it's just pure virtue signaling. Oh, we care about the victims and we want Ontario to declare this an epidemic. How, is that going to put the fear of God in some violent partner? Oh,
no, but it's going to unlock a lot of budget.
Well, okay, maybe.
That's what they're after.
But to me, it's
an epidemic, and then it becomes an emergency in their local community. They declare a public emergency with regard to this thing, and then they can spend money without oversight. They can ask for more money from the federal government and the provincial government to throw at this problem. I think it's absurd. There are already good laws in our policies and in our criminal code that if enforced could at least achieve justice in this case, maybe could have helped that victim, maybe prevented the crime in the first place. I don't know, but certainly we don't need more laws to deal with that case.
Well, we need one fewer laws, which is that we ought to allow concealed carry. Because I'm sure this guy went to the house having no fear whatsoever that he was going to get taken down. I'd like to point out to people that New Hampshire has a concealed carry law, and they have the second lowest homicide rate in all of the U.S.
Interesting. Yeah, and I agree that that victim ought to have had the option to defend herself in that way. Now, would she have been successful defending herself? Who knows? Maybe her attacker could have also been carrying, but I agree that
Well, he did. He did because no, but he shot them.
Oh, because right, he's not a law-abiding firearms owner. He's one of the others that are going to carry anyways.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So there's a common argument where gun control laws just prevent the victims from being able to defend themselves against people carrying guns.
Yeah, and it's true.
They're going to carry the guns anyways, but in this case, she didn't even have the option.
Yeah. I'll repeat it because I've said it before, but one of my campaigns was at a women's shelter. And when I told the women, these are women who were there because, of course, they were fearing for their lives or whatever. When I explained to them that one of the elements of our platform of the Libertarian Party is that they would be allowed to carry a handgun in their purse, and their eyes got this big, but they didn't get this big in horror. It was, you would allow me to defend myself?
Wow.
It was a complete revelation.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think, I think there's a lot of people on the left who misunderstand that people who cannot depend on the police to defend them want to be able to defend themselves, and we've removed that right. Because that is a true human right, the ability to defend yourself.
Well, and with the high rate of gun crime in Canada currently, and the fact that it's rising, it should be evident now to everyone, because we've never had such radical policy in Canada as we do now, and we've also never had such gun crime as we do now. And so it should be evident to everyone that these laws that prevent legal firearms owners do not stop the gun crime. So the argument to me is over. And I was never of this opinion until a few years ago, in fact, where I would ardently argue the other side of that and to say, well, I don't think we need guns, and we should outlaw them, and we should make it very difficult for people to attain them, and I was absolutely of that mind. But the data is so clear to me, given our current laws and our current crime, that those laws just don't work.
Well,
spending all that money to prevent legal firearms ownership could be spent on abating the smuggling and the illegal ownership.
And even there, I mean, do people who want to do hard drugs have any problems getting them?
No.
They're not legal. No. Is that stopping them from getting it? I mean, prohibition doesn't work. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
People are clinging to a fantasy. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, so maybe that's another topic for future. Thanks for everyone tuning in. This is a Libertarian Currents episode where we talk about current events, and look forward to another series that we intend to begin soon called the Libertarian Lens, is where we and Jacques will kind of focus a lens on a particular topic that is important to libertarian philosophy, and have guests on the show other than me. So look forward to that. Please subscribe and share. Is there anything else you want to say or mention, Jacques, before we exit?
No, I think we've said enough for today.
Maybe one thing, which is an invitation to everyone watching to consider becoming a member of the party, and also consider becoming a candidate. And that process is, there are some steps, but we can help you through that process to become a candidate. Or if you know someone that you think would be happy to become a candidate, please refer them to Jacques and introduce themselves to Jacques, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Have a great evening, Jacques. It's so nice to talk with you again. I'll see you again soon.
Likewise.